and welcome back to Infamous Indy. I'm your host, That Dead Girl, and if this is your first time joining me here, basically what I do is I sit down with you all and I share with you a true crime story from my home state of Indiana. Sometimes I also like to do a very special segment that I like to call Indy Haunts, and that's exactly what I will be doing this week. I've recently started a Facebook page and an Instagram page as well for the channel. I will post those links at the end of this video, so be sure to go like and follow those pages so that you can keep tabs on all things Infamous Indy. Speaking of the Facebook page, I hear you guys, and a lot of you have been really wanting to hear those spooky, haunted, paranormal types of stories. So this week we will be talking about the Demon House of Gary, Indiana. Now, Indiana is home to many haunted spaces and places. And let me tell you, there are many stories dealing with hauntings and the paranormal, but none quite as bizarre as the story of the Demon House of Gary, Indiana. Our story begins in November of 2011 when Latoya Ammons, along with her mother and her 3 children, move into a small home located at 3860 Carolina Street. Now, Latoya was hoping for a fresh start for herself and her family, but little did she know the terrors that awaited them just beyond the front door of their new home. So, as I said, this small home is or was located on Carolina Street in Gary, Indiana. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Gary, Indiana, consider yourself lucky. Once a thriving city, Gary was actually home to the largest steel mill complex in North America. But today, Gary, Indiana is just a mere shadow of what it once was. Since the 1960s, Gary has lost more than 60% of its population, mostly due in part to the steel industry. Basically, with the loss of jobs, people moved on. They moved elsewhere and basically left the city in shambles. Gary is very well known for its high crime rate and things like that. Funny story, we were actually on our way to a camping trip in Illinois last summer, and we stopped at a gas station, and we went inside to ask for directions, and we kind of didn't really know where we were at. And when the cashier told us that we were in Gary, Indiana, we were like, okay, it's time to leave now. Yeah, a lot of parts of it are just very sketchy. But anyway, as I said, people moved on, the city's in shambles, and now it's basically like the perfect example of urban decay in America. But other than crime, Gary, Indiana is probably most well known for being the hometown of the Jackson family. Yes, those Jacksons, Michael, Latoya, Janet, all of them. In spite of Gary not being like the best place to live, there are still obviously some neighborhoods sprinkled throughout that are not completely terrible. So, from what I've read, this neighborhood kind of seems like it falls in line with that. The small home on Carolina Street was nestled on a quaint little lane with small 1-story homes basically lining either side of the street. As Latoya and her family began to unpack and kind of get settled in, everything seemed fine. But after only a few days within the home, the Ammons family started to notice the flies. The home featured kind of a screened-in porch. And very early on in them living there, Latoya's mother, Rosa, began to notice that this screened-in porch had become completely infested with large black flies. Now, many paranormal experts do believe that any type of infestation, particularly flies, is directly related to a lot of paranormal activity and sometimes even demonic entities. The Ammons family took several different measures, to try to rid themselves of this infestation, but the flies would always return. Rosa would later go on to say, we killed them and killed them, but they just always kept coming back. So, okay, yes, having a lot of flies, especially in the warmer months in Indiana, is not too uncommon. But these events began to occur in late November, early December, in spite of how freezing cold it was outside. And once the Ammons family kind of started to notice the flies, then other activity began to occur. Sometimes after midnight, both Latoya and Rosa claimed to have heard the creaking of the basement stairs as if someone was walking up and down them. They would also often hear the creaking of the door that was located between the basement and the kitchen. And despite hearing these sounds on a regular basis, whenever they would go to investigate, there would be nothing there. But soon, insects and things that go bump in the night would be the least of their worries. On one night in particular, Rosa claims that she was woken up abruptly as if some unseen force was trying to choke the life out of her. So Rosa's struggling against this thing, that she can't even see. And once the choking does stop and she begins to catch her breath, she then claims to have seen a figure of a shadowy man pacing back and forth in the family's living room. So Rosa leaps out of bed, she runs into the living room only to find that the shadowy figure has all but disappeared. She's frantic. She's looking around the room, thinking that there may have been an intruder in the home. And she looks down at the floor and she actually claims to have seen several muddy, wet boot prints or shoe prints on the floor. And at this point, with the flies and the sounds and her seeing things and being choked, Rosa just really doesn't know what to believe anymore and she feels like she's losing her mind. But things would only escalate from here. On the evening of March 10th, 2012, the Ammons family had a family gathering within their home following the death of a loved one. Family and friends gathered within the Ammons family home to mourn their loss, but soon their grief would quickly turn into fear. As Latoya and her family and friends gathered in the living room and other parts of the house, her daughter actually had a friend over and was having a sleepover at the same time. And on this night in particular, they had chosen to sleep in her grandmother Rosa's room because it was downstairs and the bed was bigger, I guess. Around 2 a.m., when the Ammons family would normally be asleep, they were suddenly startled by the screams of Latoya's 12-year-old daughter. Latoya's daughter was said to just be screaming, "Mama, Mama," over and over. So Latoya and several other people that were in the home, they bust the door down. And once they got inside the room, no one could believe what they were seeing. Latoya, Rosa, and several other witnesses that were present in the room during this time all claimed to have seen Latoya's 12-year-old daughter levitating above the bed. So initially they heard screams, but now they've actually said that she appeared to be unconscious and was no longer screaming, just floating above her bed, exorcist style. According to witness accounts, several of them all began to circle around Latoya's daughter and they began to hold hands and pray over her. Rosa claims that through the power of prayer, her granddaughter eventually descended back onto the bed. And when she awoke, she had absolutely no recollection, no memory at all of the events that had happened. So, obviously, if this is true, what they've seen, the kid is literally levitating above the bed, that's some pretty freaky shit. So, Latoya then decides that she's going to seek help. Latoya actually contacts a priest from a local Catholic church. After visiting the home, the priest concluded that there was definitely a dark presence within the home. Latoya also contacted two unnamed clairvoyants to come in and cleanse the home. These clairvoyants claimed that there were actually more than 200 demons within the home and it served as a portal to hell. So Latoya's sought help, thinking that bringing in a priest, bringing in people to kind of cleanse the home might relieve them of this activity that they've been experiencing. But soon after, Latoya sought help, frightening behavior began to overcome her children. So it's almost as if her bringing these types of people to the home only made the situation worse. It said that Latoya's children began having dark conversations about death, seemingly speaking to people who weren't even there. So then Latoya decides that she's going to seek medical attention for her children, possibly thinking that maybe it's a behavioral issue or something like that. She doesn't really know what's going on. She's just trying her best to seek answers for herself and her family. And sadly, this doctor basically wrote off the children's behavior, claiming that they were simply just childhood delusions. And now, at this point in the story, the home has actually begun to affect the Ammons family, not only mentally, but physically as well. So much so that Latoya's children actually begin to miss a lot of school. Child Protective Services then got involved and they began making regular visits to the home. And Latoya had just about enough. She decided that it was best for herself and her family if they just pack up and leave the home. So Latoya and her family pack up some of their things and they actually go to stay with her brother Kevin. Now, the idea was, by leaving, whatever was haunting them or affecting them, she had hoped that it would stay behind. But Latoya's brother Kevin claims that when they left their home to come and stay with him, this entity followed them. Kevin Ammons claims that he witnessed his nephews be physically attacked by this presence on more than one occasion. He said it appeared as if they were being thrown into walls and thrown over furniture by some sort of unseen force. And in just the few short days that they had been staying with Latoya's brother Kevin, their behavior began to take an even darker turn. Kevin recalls waking up one morning and, kind of walking downstairs to sort of start his day. And there he finds the children, sitting around in the living room. Normal enough. But as Kevin entered the room, he claims that the children all turned towards him and began to chant in unison. He repeatedly tries to get them to stop, and he claims that they wouldn't because they were basically entranced. And it's then that he witnesses one of his nephews turn to the other, and he begins to speak in a very dark and grovelly voice. He says to him, "Are you ready to kill my brother?" To which the other nephew answers back, "Yes, I am, my brother." And things just kept getting weirder from there. And once Kevin, Latoya, and Rosa realized that they were unable to break the children out of this trance, they then decided it was best to remove the children from the home and immediately seek medical attention. Latoya claims that when they tried to separate the children initially, they began to attack one another physically. So that's 3 adults attempting to restrain 3 younger children. But it seemed as if they were never going to regain control of the situation. Rosa finally gets one of her grandsons by the arms, and she's kind of trying to hold his arms back away from his body. She claims that he growled at her and began to speak in a voice that sounded not human. He basically screams at her, "Get your fucking hands off me, you old bitch." And then he proceeded to kind of like ram his head into her chest and then later on her stomach. And this went on for quite some time. Once they finally got the children into the back seat of the car and all buckled in, it said that they began to laugh and flail about the back seat of the car erratically. They rushed the children to Methodist Hospital, And once they got to Methodist Hospital, even more bizarre behavior would start to occur. So now they're at the hospital, and while they're there, it seems that all three of Latoya's children are being affected by whatever energy this is. Literal chaos began to ensue inside this hospital room. It's said that Latoya's daughter began to hold her head and scream out at the doctors in pain. She claimed that there were voices speaking to her in her head, telling her to do crazy things, and she couldn't make them stop. She then begins to cry and scream out to her grandmother, begging her to make the voices stop. Rosa claims that her granddaughter had lost complete control of her own body, and all she kept saying was that she could not look them in the eyes. Who is them? I do not know, but it sounds pretty fucking scary to me. Now, while all this is going on over here, one of the boys actually starts to exhibit this extreme behavior as well. While lying in a hospital bed, it's said that he began to kind of roll his head around his neck like this, and that his eyes actually went into the back of his head. Latoya claims that he then began to speak in a voice that sounded otherworldly. So he starts speaking in this inhuman voice again, and he says, I've been here long enough now. I need to kill. I'm going to kill them all. Now, what happens next in the story is pretty crazy. But with that being said, there is a lot of evidence to back up these claims and support them. What happens next in this hospital room was actually witnessed by doctors, several other hospital staff, a psychiatrist, Child Protective Services case manager Valerie Washington, as well as members of the Ammons family. And I just want to kind of read to you guys an excerpt from the Child Protective Services report that was done by Valerie Washington. The boy began to growl and charge at his grandmother. He was speaking in a strange voice, saying, I will kill you, while staring around the room. The boy then turned to his grandmother and smiled evilly. He then stood up and fell back against the wall and proceeded to walk up the wall in a backwards motion. So basically, this kid is kind of got his back almost up against the wall. There's people around him, and he kind of backs up and walks up the wall backwards. And that to me is probably one of the more insane claims of this story. Like, that is for real some exorcist type shit, seeing a kid, walk up a wall backwards, basically. Now, I will say, if it had just only been, the family members, I would find it a little more hard to believe. But because of the types of witnesses these were, and this is actually part of an official report, I think that the claims are a lot more substantial. And I think that's what intrigued me about this story the most. I mean, there are reports from hospital staff, Child Protective Services case managers. There's even a 5-page report from the Gary Police Department. There are just so many different perspectives from so many different people. It seems that anyone who enters the demon house is affected by it, in one way or another. I think that's a good stopping point for part 1 of the story. I really just wanted to give background on the Ammons family and their claims. They were the family that really first reported these occurrences in this house, although the house does kind of have a little bit of a lurid history with, 5 people having died within the home and other things like that. And as most of you probably know, the reason why this house has become sort of iconic, if you will, is because it was actually purchased by Zak Bagans. And we will be talking a lot more about that in part 2 of the story. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and hanging out with me today. If you haven't already, please do make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, we're also on Facebook and Instagram now as well, so definitely go check those out too. If you like what I do here at Infamous Indy, please be sure to share my content with other people who love true crime and spooky things as much as I do. Definitely be on the lookout for part 2 very soon. And as always, stay spooky, keep it creepy, and watch your back because it's a crazy fucking world out there.